The Divine Signature. Recognizing God's Hand in Every Moment. Written by Ronnie Rowland. Published by Growth Literacy Lounge. Some moments in life feel too perfectly timed to be mere coincidence. A friend reaching out just when you need encouragement. A door closing only for a better one to open. A deep sense of peace settling in your heart when circumstances suggest otherwise. These moments whisper of something greater, a divine presence moving through the details of everyday life. Yet, too often, they go unnoticed. We are too busy, too distracted, too quick to dismiss them as chance. God is not absent, His hand is not hidden, but seeing Him requires a shift in perspective. We often expect Him to reveal Himself through the miraculous, grand gestures, undeniable signs, yet He more often moves in the ordinary. His fingerprints are in the small details, the quiet patterns, the gentle nudges guiding our steps. He is always speaking, always working, always weaving something greater than we can see. The question is not whether He is present, but whether we are paying attention. Spiritual awareness is not about waiting for a burning bush, it is about training our eyes to see what has been there all along. It means slowing down, reflecting, and expecting to encounter Him in the everyday. It is found in gratitude, in trust, in recognizing how He subtly directs our lives, and once we begin to see through this lens, everything changes. What once seemed random now carries purpose. What once felt like silence now holds meaning. What once appeared disconnected now reveals a greater design. This book is an invitation to see differently, to recognize God's hand in the details of your life. To understand that every moment, every delay, every redirection is part of something intentional. His signature is written across your story, waiting to be noticed. Once you learn to see it, you will never walk through life the same way again. Chapter 1. The Hidden Hand of God. Life can feel like a string of random events, waking up, going through routines, facing obstacles, finding joy, and venturing into the unknown. But beneath the surface, there's something bigger at work. A quiet force, steady and sovereign, weaves each moment together. The divine hand is always there, yet many of us fail to notice, not because God is absent, but because we're too distracted to see. Ever had a moment that felt too perfectly timed to be coincidence? A friend calling just when you needed encouragement. A job opening appearing when hope seemed lost. A deep, unshakable peace arriving in the middle of chaos. These are not accidents. They are whispers from heaven, subtle reminders that God is not distant, not passive, but intricately involved in the details of our lives. Scripture is filled with evidence of His hidden hand. Take Joseph. His brothers betrayed him, selling him into slavery. To the outside world it looked like injustice and suffering. Yet, years later when famine struck, Joseph had risen to power in Egypt, exactly where he needed to be to save his people. The moment of pain had a purpose. Looking back, Joseph saw it clearly. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. It wasn't obvious in the moment, but God's hand had been guiding him all along. We often look for God in the miraculous, waiting for parted seas, burning bushes, or thunderous signs. But what if He's more often found in the ordinary? The soft glow of sunrise after a dark night. The quiet strength that steadies our hearts in uncertain times. The kindness of a stranger, showing up just when we need it. These aren't random. They are brushstrokes of a masterful Creator. Seeing the hidden hand of God requires a shift in perspective. If we believe life is just a series of coincidences, we'll miss the divine fingerprints everywhere. But when we trust that God is at work, even when we don't understand how, our eyes begin to open. Think back to a time when something didn't go as planned. A missed flight that later made sense. A job you didn't get, only to find a better opportunity down the road. What if closed doors aren't rejections, but redirections? God is not only in the yeses, He's also in the times He says no. And often, His no is an unseen yes to something greater. The challenge is, we rarely see the full picture. We're too close to the canvas, looking at brushstrokes of confusion, pain, and delay. But step back and the masterpiece begins to take shape. What once seemed random or unfair suddenly makes sense. One of the biggest obstacles to recognizing God's hand, our own pace. We rush from one moment to the next, rarely stopping to ask, what is God doing here? The divine is often drowned out by the noise of our own hurried lives. But when we slow down, when we take notice, we start to see His presence in places we never expected. God doesn't always speak in dramatic displays. More often, he moves through whispers, a shift in circumstances, an inner nudge, a gentle redirection. The more we train ourselves to see, the more obvious his presence becomes. What once seemed hidden becomes unmistakable. The detours, delays, and disruptions. They aren't signs of abandonment. They are signs of divine orchestration. God's hand is always at work. The question is, will we take the time to see it? Chapter 2. Slowing down to see the divine. Life moves at a relentless pace. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months, and before we know it, entire seasons have slipped through our fingers. We rush from one task to the next, cramming schedules, chasing deadlines, barely stopping to breathe. And in all this motion, we miss so much. The divine isn't found in chaos, it's in the stillness. God is always present, always speaking, but we must slow down to see him. We often expect God to show up in grand, unmistakable ways. Yet, more often than not, his presence is woven into the quiet moments of life. Elijah, weary and seeking God on Mount Horeb, looked for him in the wind, the earthquake, and the fire. But God wasn't in any of them. Instead, he came in a whisper, a still, small voice. Had Elijah not been listening, he would have missed it. How many times do we miss the voice of God simply because we're too distracted to hear? The world teaches us that worth is measured by productivity. We fill every moment with movement, chase the next milestone, and drown out silence with constant noise. But when we operate at such a relentless speed, we overlook the divine brushstrokes in our lives. Even Jesus, in the midst of his ministry, withdrew from the crowds to pray in solitude. If he, God in human form, made time for stillness, how much more do we need it? Slowing down isn't about doing less, it's about seeing more. When we pause long enough to be fully present, the world takes on new meaning. A sunrise becomes more than the start of a day, it becomes a quiet testimony of God's faithfulness. A passing conversation carries unexpected wisdom. A frustrating delay turns into divine timing. When we are fully present, we begin to see the intricate ways God is moving. There's a reason the psalmist wrote, "Be still, and know that I am God." Stillness is the gateway to revelation. It creates space for God to make himself known. But in a world that thrives on noise and motion, stillness feels foreign, even uncomfortable. We resist slowing down because silence forces us to confront what's beneath the surface. Yet, it is in the quiet where transformation happens. When we slow down, we hear our own thoughts with clarity. We recognize the burdens we've been carrying. We allow God to meet us in our rawest, most honest moments. The interruptions we once brushed past begin to feel like divine appointments. The moments we dismissed as ordinary reveal unexpected meaning. Jesus often taught through parables, using the familiar seeds, vineyards, lost coins, to reveal deeper truths. Those who truly listen grasp the message. In the same way, God speaks through our daily lives. But we have to be paying attention. When was the last time you truly paused? Not just a fleeting moment between tasks, but long enough to notice. Did you see God's kindness in the smile of a stranger? Feel his peace in an unexplainable moment of stillness? Sense his hand redirecting your steps? Slowing down is an act of trust. It's believing that even in stillness God is working, that his presence isn't something we have to chase, it's something we need to notice. When we make space for stillness, patterns emerge, connections become clear, and what once felt random begins to reveal purpose. The divine is not missing, it is simply unseen by those moving too fast to notice. But when we slow down, we begin to see his presence everywhere. Chapter 3. When doors close, another opens. Disappointment has a way of clouding our perspective. When a door closes, it often feels like rejection, failure, or an unfair turn in life's path. We wrestle with doubts, questioning why something we longed for slipped through our fingers. In those moments, it's hard to see that a closed door is not an ending, it's a redirection, a divine nudge towards something greater than we imagined. Scripture is filled with stories of people facing closed doors, only to later realize those very moments led them somewhere better. Paul, eager to spread the gospel, planned to enter Asia, but God prevented him. The door to his mission slammed shut. Yet in that divine detour, Paul was led to Macedonia, where his ministry flourished beyond what he had envisioned. The closed door wasn't a setback, it was an invitation to something greater. When we encounter a closed door, our first instinct is often frustration. We replay events, wondering what we could have done differently. We question if we missed an opportunity, or if we were simply not good enough. But what if we shifted our perspective? What if, instead of seeing closed doors as losses, we saw them as divine protection or preparation? What if every disappointment was actually a setup for something better? Many times, what we think we want is far less than what God has planned. We hold on to relationships that aren't meant for us, jobs that don't align with our calling, and dreams that are too small compared to what He desires to give. When doors close, it's not to deprive us, it's to make room for something greater. If we received everything we asked for, we might settle for far less than God's best. A closed door is not the end of the story. It is an invitation to trust, to surrender, and to believe that something unseen is unfolding. Sometimes, we don't realize a door needed to close until much later. We look back and see that if things had gone our way, we would have missed something far better. In the moment, rejection stings, but with time, we begin to understand that what felt like a loss was actually grace. The key is not to force open what God has closed. Too often, we push against barriers, trying to make things work when they're not meant to. We exhaust ourselves striving for something that isn't aligned with our purpose. But when God shuts a door, He does so with wisdom and love. What He has for us won't require striving, manipulation, or anxiety. It will come with peace, even if the path is different than expected. Trusting God in the face of a closed door requires faith in the unseen. It means believing that just because you don't see an open door yet doesn't mean one isn't there. The space between doors is where faith is tested. Will you trust when you don't understand? Will you wait when the next step is unclear? Sometimes the delay between a closed door and an open one is necessary. It's in this waiting that God prepares us for what's next. If we rush ahead too quickly, we may not be ready to receive it fully. Waiting isn't wasted time, it's a refining process, shaping us into who we need to be for what's ahead. If a door has recently closed in your life, resist the urge to despair. Instead, ask what God is making room for. Look beyond the immediate loss and open your heart to the possibility that something greater is on its way. Closed doors are not punishments, they are divine setups. What is meant for you will never pass you by. When one door closes, another always opens. Chapter 4. Divine Whispers in the Ordinary. God doesn't always speak through grand miracles or dramatic signs. More often, He speaks in whispers, gentle nudges that are easy to miss. The issue isn't that God is silent, it's that we're too distracted to hear Him. We search for burning bushes and overlook the still, small voice guiding us in everyday moments. His whispers are woven into the fabric of our daily lives, but only those who slow down and pay attention recognize them. A word from a friend at just the right time. A sudden peace when anxiety should have taken over. A verse appearing when you need it most. These are not coincidences, they are whispers of a God who is always near. But to hear these whispers, we must train our hearts to listen. The world is loud, full of endless distractions that pull our focus away from the sacred. If we only seek God in the extraordinary, we will miss Him in the ordinary. Throughout Scripture, God often spoke in unexpected ways. He called Samuel in the quiet of the night so softly that the boy mistook it for Eli's voice. He revealed Himself to Elijah not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a gentle whisper. He guided wise men with a star, warned Joseph through a dream, and opened Balaam's eyes with a talking donkey. God has never needed a stage to make His presence known. He moves in subtle ways that require stillness to perceive. Many wonder why they don't hear from God. The truth is, He speaks more than we realize, but His voice does not compete for our attention. It is not forceful or demanding, it is patient, waiting for us to quiet our hearts and listen. A soul tuned to God recognizes His voice in the smallest details. The more we practice listening, the more we begin to see His fingerprints on everything. How many times has God tried to get your attention, but you were too busy to notice? Perhaps He redirected your plans in a way that felt inconvenient at the time. Maybe He placed someone in your life to speak a truth you needed to hear. Or He closed a door to protect you, though all you saw was disappointment. God is always speaking, but His whispers require discernment. Recognizing divine whispers begins with a posture of awareness. Slow down. Pay attention. Ask God to reveal His presence in the seemingly insignificant moments. He often speaks through the people around us, through a thought we can't shake, or through a deep knowing that defies logic. These moments are gentle taps on the shoulder, invitations to lean in closer. Jesus often used parables, stories drawn from ordinary life, to reveal profound truths. He spoke of seeds, vineyards, and lost coins, things his listeners encountered daily. But not everyone grasped the deeper meaning. "Whoever has ears, let them hear," he said repeatedly. The same is true today. God is speaking, but not everyone is listening. Sometimes, God's whisper is a simple prompting to reach out to someone, a sudden urge to pray for a friend, a burden to encourage a stranger. These aren't random feelings, they are divine invitations. When we follow these nudges, we begin to see how God orchestrates even the smallest details. It takes practice to recognize the whispers of God. The more we respond, the clearer they become. The more we ignore them, the quieter they seem. But He is always there, always speaking, always guiding. We don't need to wait for a dramatic sign to know He is near. The divine is not found in the noise but in the quiet, the simple, the ordinary moments we often overlook. God is whispering to you even now. The question is, will you listen? Chapter 5. The Language of Patterns. Life is full of patterns, yet most people move too quickly to notice them. God often speaks through repetition, aligning circumstances, encounters, and opportunities in ways too precise to be mere coincidence. When we train our hearts to recognize these patterns, we begin to see His hand at work. The divine signature isn't hidden, it's woven into the rhythms of our lives, waiting to be acknowledged. There are moments when the same message appears again and again. A sermon that speaks directly to your situation, a phrase you keep hearing in conversations, a scripture that keeps resurfacing. At first, these repetitions may seem insignificant, but they aren't. They are signposts, divine nudges to pay attention. When something keeps standing out, wisdom calls us to pause and ask, "What is God showing me?" Patterns reveal purpose. Jesus used repetition in His teachings, reinforcing truths in different ways. He asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" He repeatedly told His disciples, "Do not be afraid." This wasn't redundancy, it was intentional. God knows we are prone to forget, so He brings lessons to our attention multiple times. When something keeps repeating, it often means there's a truth we haven't fully grasped yet. Many of the greatest breakthroughs in Scripture came through divine patterns. Joseph's dreams followed a sequence, revealing his destiny. The Israelites' journey to the Promised Land was marked by repeated lessons on trust and obedience. Even in creation, God embedded patterns into nature, the tides, the seasons, the life cycle. These rhythms reflect His consistency and order. The same principle applies to our personal lives. What themes, struggles, or opportunities seem to repeat for you? Sometimes patterns reveal areas that need growth. If the same struggles keep arising, they may be signals of a lesson left unlearned. A person who continually faces relational conflicts may need to examine deeper issues of trust or forgiveness. Someone who repeatedly struggles financially may need to seek wisdom and stewardship. God uses patterns to highlight areas requiring transformation. When we recognize these cycles, we can seek His guidance instead of becoming frustrated. Other times, patterns confirm that we're on the right path. Have you ever wrestled with a decision, only to receive multiple affirmations? A door opens just as another closes. Encouragement arrives from unexpected places. Doubt gives way to peace. These are not accidents, they are divine patterns meant to reassure us. When we walk in alignment with God's will, He often confirms our steps through repetition. Recognizing patterns requires awareness. Most people are too distracted to notice how God intricately weaves circumstances together. The key is to slow down, reflect, and intentionally seek meaning in life's repetitions. Keeping a journal can help identify patterns that might not be obvious at first. Writing down experiences, insights, and recurring themes allows us to step back and see connections we might otherwise overlook. God is a master storyteller, and our lives are not a series of random events. Every encounter, every delay, every unexpected moment is part of a greater narrative. The more we attune ourselves to His patterns, the more we recognize His guidance. We begin to trust that nothing is wasted, that even the smallest details are orchestrated for a purpose. If you find yourself in a season where the same lessons, struggles, or opportunities keep resurfacing, consider that God may be speaking through them. Ask Him for clarity. Look beyond the surface. Seek the deeper meaning. His patterns are everywhere, but only those who take the time to notice will understand their significance. God is speaking through the patterns in your life. The question is, are you paying attention? Chapter 6. Spiritual Awareness. Training your eyes to see. Seeing God's hand in everyday life takes more than passive observation. It requires spiritual awareness, a trained ability to recognize the divine in the seemingly mundane. God is always at work, but only those who intentionally seek Him truly see. Spiritual awareness is not reserved for a select few, it is available to anyone willing to cultivate it. The more we practice, the clearer His presence becomes. Spiritual blindness is not a lack of belief but a failure to perceive. Many people believe in God yet struggle to recognize His movements. They pray for guidance but overlook the answers when they come in unexpected ways. They ask for signs but dismiss them as coincidences. This is not because God is silent, it is because their spiritual senses have not been trained to see. The problem is not His absence but our inattentiveness. Jesus often spoke about having eyes to see and ears to hear. He knew that not everyone would perceive the deeper realities of the kingdom. When He performed miracles, some saw the power of God, while others dismissed them as illusions. The difference wasn't in what was happening, it was in the ability to recognize it. The same is true today. Two people can experience the same moment, one sees God's hand, the other sees nothing. What we perceive depends on how we choose to look. Training our spiritual awareness begins with expectation. If we do not expect to see God, we won't. Many people live as if God is distant, believing He only intervenes in major events. But when we expect Him to be involved in every detail, we start to see Him everywhere, the right conversation at the right time. A sudden idea that sparks a breakthrough. A delay that unexpectedly protects us from harm. These are all ways God moves. The more we acknowledge Him, the more we see. One of the most powerful ways to develop spiritual awareness is through prayer, not just speaking to God, but listening. Many approach prayer as a one-way conversation, presenting requests, but never pausing to receive insight. But awareness grows in stillness. When we quiet our hearts and listen, we begin to sense His promptings. A thought that lingers, a scripture that comes to mind, a conviction urging us to act, these are often whispers from God. Reflection also sharpens our ability to see. Life moves fast, and if we do not take time to look back, we miss the patterns. Journaling can be a powerful tool in this process. Writing down moments of divine intervention, unexpected blessings, or lessons learned helps us recognize God's consistency. Over time, we see how intricately He weaves our lives together. What once seemed like isolated events reveal themselves as connected pieces of a greater plan. Gratitude is another key to spiritual awareness. When we make it a habit to thank God for even the smallest blessings, we become more attuned to His presence. Gratitude shifts our focus from what is missing to what is already there. It removes the veil of dissatisfaction and opens our eyes to the abundance of His provision. A thankful heart perceives more, because it is always looking for reasons to praise. Spiritual awareness also deepens through obedience. When we respond to God's promptings, we become more sensitive to them. The more we ignore them, the fainter they become. Many times we sense a nudge to reach out to someone, make a decision, or step into something unfamiliar. The more we act on these promptings, the more we recognize them as divine. God honors those who listen by speaking more clearly. The world teaches us to rely solely on logic, but faith teaches us to see beyond what is visible. Spiritual awareness is not about abandoning reason, but about allowing faith to expand our vision. It is choosing to believe that what we see is not all there is. God is moving, speaking, and guiding in every moment. The question is, are we paying attention? God's presence is all around you. The more you train your eyes to see, the more you will recognize what has been there all along. Chapter 7. Gratitude. The key to more revelation. Gratitude changes the way you see the world. It shifts your focus from what is missing to what is present, from what has not yet happened to what God has already done. When you begin to thank Him for the small things, your eyes open to see even more of His hand at work. Gratitude is not just a reaction, it is a spiritual discipline that increases awareness of the divine. The more you practice it, the more you recognize His presence in every moment. Many people go through life unaware of God's daily blessings because they are too focused on what they lack. They wait for big miracles while overlooking the small ones that happen every day. The air they breathe, the sunrise that greets them, the opportunities that come unexpectedly, these are all signs of His presence. But without gratitude, they go unnoticed. Gratitude trains the heart to see, to appreciate, and to recognize the divine fingerprints woven into life's details. Jesus demonstrated the power of gratitude in profound ways. Before multiplying the loaves and fish, he gave thanks. Before raising Lazarus from the dead, he thanked God. Gratitude preceded the miracle. It was not an afterthought, but a posture of faith, an acknowledgement that God was already at work before anything changed. When you give thanks, even before the outcome is clear, you are declaring trust in God's provision. Gratitude does not mean ignoring difficulties. It means choosing to see God's goodness even in the midst of them. Paul, writing from prison, encouraged believers to give thanks in all circumstances. He was not thanking God for his suffering but for his presence in it. Gratitude does not require perfect conditions. It is an act of faith that transforms your perspective, reminding you that even in challenges, God is still moving. One of the greatest barriers to gratitude is comparison. When you constantly measure your life against others, you overlook the blessings that are uniquely yours. Social media and culture fuel a mindset of lack, making it easy to focus on what you do not have. But gratitude shifts your attention. It reminds you that God's blessings are personal, designed specifically for your journey. Instead of longing for someone else's path, you begin to appreciate the one He has given you. Practicing gratitude requires intentionality. It is easy to give thanks when life is going well, but true gratitude is a daily discipline. Start by noticing the small ways God provides. Keep a journal of moments where His presence is evident. Speak words of thanks, not just in prayer but in conversation. The more you verbalize gratitude, the more your heart aligns with it. Over time, this practice rewires your perspective, making you more attuned to God's hand in every situation. Gratitude also deepens faith. When you reflect on past blessings, you build confidence for the future. Looking back at God's faithfulness reminds you that He has always provided, guided, and sustained you. This assurance strengthens trust, making it easier to walk in expectation. Instead of fearing the unknown, you approach it with confidence, knowing that the same God who has been faithful before will be faithful again. The power of gratitude is that it multiplies. The more you give thanks, the more you see to be thankful for. It creates a cycle where awareness of God's presence grows, leading to deeper appreciation and greater revelation. What once seemed ordinary becomes extraordinary. The moments you used to overlook become clear signs of His hand at work. If you want to see more of God in your life, begin with gratitude. Thank Him for what you already have, for what He has already done, and for what He is still doing. Gratitude unlocks spiritual vision, allowing you to recognize His presence in ways you never have before. The more you give thanks, the more you will see. Chapter 8. Navigating Silence. When you can't see His hand. There are seasons when God feels distant. Prayers seem unanswered, doors remain shut, and His presence feels like a whisper drowned out by life's noise. In these moments, doubt creeps in, making us question whether He hears us or even cares. But silence is not absence. Just because we cannot see His hand does not mean He is not working. Some of God's greatest movements happen in the quiet, beyond what our eyes can perceive. Scripture is filled with stories of divine silence. Job, stripped of everything, cried out for answers but received none. David, a man after God's own heart, wrote psalms of anguish, pleading for God not to hide His face. Even Jesus on the cross cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Silence is not unfamiliar to those who walk with God. It is a refining place where faith is tested and strengthened. God's silence is often misunderstood. We assume that if He is not speaking in obvious ways, He must be distant. But silence does not mean inactivity. A seed buried in the soil is unseen, but it is not lifeless. Growth is happening beneath the surface, even when nothing appears to be changing. The same is true in spiritual silence. God is working in the unseen, arranging details, shifting circumstances, and preparing hearts. What feels like delay is often divine preparation. One of the hardest aspects of silence is the waiting. We want immediate answers, quick resolutions, and clear signs. But God is not bound by human timelines. He sees the bigger picture we cannot. Abraham waited decades for the promise of a son. Joseph spent years in prison before stepping into his purpose. The Israelites wandered for 40 years before entering the promised land. In every case, the waiting was not wasted, it was shaping them for what was ahead. How we respond to divine silence matters. We can grow bitter, assuming God has forgotten us, or we can lean in, trusting that He is present even when we do not feel Him. Silence invites us to seek Him more earnestly, to press in when we feel like pulling away. It refines our motives, exposing whether we seek God for what He gives or for who He is. A faith that depends only on visible signs is fragile. True faith trusts in the unseen, believing in God's faithfulness even in silence. Sometimes, silence is an invitation to listen in a deeper way. We often expect God to speak through loud, unmistakable signs, but He often chooses whispers. When Elijah sought God, he did not find Him in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. He found Him in a gentle whisper. If God is silent, it may be because He is speaking in ways we have not yet learned to recognize. He may be drawing us into stillness, teaching us to quiet the noise so we can hear Him more clearly. There are also times when silence is meant to strengthen our trust. If God responded immediately to every request, faith would not be necessary. Silence teaches us to walk by faith, not by sight. It stretches us, forcing us to rely on His character rather than our circumstances. It reminds us that His faithfulness is not dependent on our feelings but on His unchanging nature. If you are in a season where God feels silent, take heart. He has not abandoned you. His silence does not mean He is distant, it means He is working in ways you cannot yet see. Keep praying, even when it feels like no one is listening. Keep trusting, even when you do not understand. Keep seeking, even when answers are unclear. Silence is not the end of the story. It is the space where faith grows, where trust is refined, and where God prepares you for what is to come. God's hand is never absent, even when it is unseen. His silence is not rejection, it is an invitation to deeper trust. Chapter 9. Living with Expectation. Faith is more than belief, it is expectation. It is waking up each day with the confidence that God is moving, even when there is no immediate evidence. Living with expectation is not wishful thinking, it is anchoring yourself in the certainty that God is actively at work in your life. It is an attitude that shifts how you see the world, allowing you to recognize His hand, even in the smallest details. Many believe in God but do not live as though they expect Him to move. They pray but do not anticipate answers. They hope but do not prepare for what they ask. Expectation is the difference between passively wishing and actively positioning yourself to receive. When you truly believe in God's faithfulness, you start living as though His promises are already unfolding. You act, think, and move with the assurance that He is at work. In Scripture, those who expected God to move often saw Him do the impossible. The woman with the issue of blood pressed through the crowd, convinced that touching Jesus' garment would heal her. The centurion believed Jesus' word alone was enough to heal his servant. Bartimaeus, the blind man, cried out persistently, believing that Jesus could restore his sight. Their expectation moved them to action, and because of their faith they received what they sought. Living with expectation does not mean ignoring reality. It means acknowledging reality while believing that God can change it. It is seeing obstacles and choosing to trust anyway. It is recognizing delays but believing they are not denials. It is walking by faith, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Expectation does not remove difficulties, but it shifts your focus. Instead of dwelling on what has not happened, you begin looking for signs of what God is doing. Expectation changes the way you pray. Instead of approaching prayer with doubt, you pray with confidence. You no longer ask, "Will God come through?" but declare, "I know He is working." You stop seeing prayer as a ritual and start experiencing it as a conversation with a God who listens and responds. You begin to notice how prayers are answered in unexpected ways, how doors open at the right time, and how God's guidance becomes clearer as you move forward. One of the greatest barriers to expectation is disappointment. When prayers seem unanswered, when delays stretch longer than expected, it is tempting to lower your hopes to avoid being let down. But living with expectation requires resisting the urge to settle. It means believing that just because something has not happened yet does not mean it never will. Delay does not equal denial. God's timing is different from ours, but His plans are always greater than we imagine. Expectation also requires action. Noah built the ark before the first drop of rain. Abraham left his homeland without knowing where God would lead him. Peter stepped out of the boat before the water became firm beneath his feet. Expectation moves beyond passive hope, it steps forward in faith. It prepares, plans, and positions itself for what is coming. If you truly believe God is moving in your life, you will start making room for what He is about to do. Gratitude fuels expectation. When you recognize what God has already done, it strengthens your belief in what He will do next. Looking back at past faithfulness reminds you that He has never failed you. Instead of focusing on what is missing, you focus on what is present. Thanksgiving shifts your mindset from waiting for something to happen to celebrating the ways God is already working. Living with expectation transforms how you experience life. It makes you more aware, more grateful, and more open to divine opportunities. You begin to see doors where others see walls. You recognize possibilities where others see impossibilities. You trust that even in delays and detours, something greater is being prepared. God responds to expectation. When you live as though He is at work, you begin to see Him everywhere. The more you anticipate His presence, the more you recognize His hand in the details. Faith is not just believing that God can, it is living as though He already has. Chapter 10. Seeing the signature everywhere. The divine is not distant. God's presence is woven into the details of everyday life, yet many walk past His signature without noticing. To truly recognize His hand, you must train yourself to see. It is not that He is absent, it is that most people are not looking. Those who expect to see Him, who slow down enough to notice, who reflect on their lives with spiritual awareness, begin to see His signature everywhere. Many believe God's presence is reserved for extraordinary moments, but He is just as present in the ordinary. He is in the unexpected kindness of a stranger, the perfectly timed encouragement of a friend, the peace that settles in your heart when logic says you should be anxious. He is in the closed doors that protect you, the delays that redirect you, the small moments that turn into life-changing shifts. Nothing is random. Everything is connected. His hand is always at work. Recognizing God's signature requires a shift in perception. Instead of waiting for dramatic signs, learn to see His presence in the subtle. A problem that resolves itself unexpectedly. A scripture that appears just when you need it. A quiet moment that reassures you He is near. These are not coincidences, they are brushstrokes of a masterful Creator. The more you acknowledge them, the more you will see. Gratitude is the key that unlocks greater awareness. When you begin thanking God for what you once dismissed as ordinary, you start to recognize how much He has been moving all along. The moment you shift from asking, "Where is God?" to declaring, "I see Him here," everything changes. Your prayers become filled with appreciation instead of only requests. Your perspective shifts from scarcity to abundance. The more you give thanks, the more your eyes open to the countless ways He is present. Reflection also sharpens your ability to see. Looking back on life's journey reveals how intricately God has been guiding you. What once seemed like a setback now appears as divine redirection. What once felt like silence is now understood as preparation. Time has a way of revealing what was hidden in the moment. The more you reflect, the more patterns you see. The more patterns you see, the stronger your trust becomes. Living with spiritual awareness means walking through life expecting to encounter God at every turn. It does not mean life will always be easy or that every answer will be immediate. It does not mean you will understand everything in the moment. It means trusting that every step, even the uncertain ones, is being woven into a greater design. It means knowing that even when you do not see His hand, it is still guiding you. Faith is not just believing that God exists. It is believing that He is actively involved in your life. It is choosing to trust when things do not make sense. It is choosing to see Him when others see only coincidence. It is choosing to walk forward even when the next step is unclear. Faith allows you to see what is invisible to the natural eye. When you begin to live this way, you will experience a transformation. You will start to recognize that even your most difficult moments had purpose. You will see divine connections in the people you meet, the lessons you learn, and the paths you take. You will realize that nothing in your life has been wasted. Every experience, every challenge, every redirection has been shaping you, leading you, and preparing you for what is ahead. The divine signature is not hidden, it is everywhere. It is in your past, your present, and your future. It is in the details, the delays, and the detours. It is in the doors that open and the ones that close. The question is not whether God is moving. The question is whether you will choose to see. God's signature is written across your life. When you open your eyes to His presence, you will never see the world the same way again. Take care and be well.